As ADHDers, it's not a disorder of not knowing what to do. We very well know what is important, what needs to get done. But when we harness those values, we're able to gain these guardrails in essential focus.
When you have a value, it will motivate you to do certain things.
When somebody feels lost or they feel self-doubt in taking the steps to go in the direction of that vision, there's a lack of clarity on the steps to get there, the to-dos, the tasks to get there, is because they're looking for an external locus of control. They're comparing to what other people are doing.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the ADHD Eavesdrop, where you can be a butterfly on the wall and listen in on my conversations. Today, we have Jen Kreiner back with us, and we are going to have a great conversation about values and how they help motivate us to do the things, or sometimes they don't help us at all being motivated to do the things. So, Jen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Janine. I'm super excited to be here.
So we were talking about values in our last conversation, just a conversation that we were having, and we're like, we need to do a podcast on values because they just really don't get talked about very much. Like, I could ask a person, what are your 5 key values? And they would look at me like I'd grown 2 heads and started calling myself Henry. Yet, values have a huge role in motivation and doing the things that we want to do and reaching our goals.
Yes, absolutely. As an ADHD and executive function coach, it is one of the initial tools that in the assessment phase that we use to give people an opportunity to really spend time understanding themselves and what is significant to them. And so often, the path that we're following, the things on our to-do lists, those are all expectations outside of ourselves that were handed to us, that we are looking at others around us for that sense of who am I and what should I do, where it's often the first time they look internally to recognize those core values for themselves, because then that gives them the fuel to actually move forward in a way that is for them.
We talk about motivation. We know that people with ADHD are not always motivated the same way as people who do not have ADHD, in that ADHD folks tend to be motivated by interest, fun or novelty, challenge or urgency, right? And so, where neurotypical peers tend to be more motivated by what's important. So, bringing in the values is it's even more important for people with ADHD because we are interested in the things that we value. The things that we value are things that are going to be motivating in the first place because we have interest in those things. But let's talk a little bit about values in the first place. What are values?
Yeah, core values ultimately are, and this is interesting because the way that it was ultimately shared um, is that, from the time we were little, these are internal drivers for us. And so there's no right, there's no wrong. There is, and therein lies like when we want to compare ourselves to other people who are pursuing something, they have different values than we do. So it makes sense that people have a different experience and are pursuing different paths. But I do tend to think that our life experiences also contribute to those core values and that they can be evolving. And as it pertains to different spheres of our life, we can be holding a core value as a driver that is different in one area than another. For example, family life versus your professional goals.
Yeah.
Identify what you can harness to be that motivator to do the things to get you to that ultimate future vision. So if we were
Mhm.
to plug in to my, little internal GPS, that's navigating me where I want to go, for work, I'm going to have a certain destination. And maybe for my home life or my personal life, I'm going to have a different destination that I'm, moving towards or working towards. And, for example, if were to take one for each, for my personal life, connection might be the thing that I'm always coming back to. Is this supporting me remaining and maintaining connection, with my husband, connection with my kids, because often we'll have so many things going on that we forget that we can delete things, we can adjust to maintain that capacity and um, to measure everything and check in with that value. Is this really important to me? Um, And often we'll see that we can let a lot of things go that have just been handed to us over time, that we thought needed to stay, in play and engaged in our lives. And it's pretty freeing to remove those layers, of external expectations or perceived obligations. Because when I define success for my family life as maintaining connection, it will always come back, to that when I check in.
Mhm. And then in a work atmosphere, you still have the value of connection, but your goal at work might not be as associated with that particular value. Although there are ways at work that you would be still demonstrating that value, it wouldn't be particularly a goal for you, maybe, unless there's somebody that you specifically are wanting to connect with more, like an employees or that type of thing.
Yes, absolutely. And so, for example, if I wanted to be, renowned around the state in my field, and that is my future goal, then I would, look to a values exercise and go through the process, which there is a great one on Brene Brown's website, her Dare to Lead list of values, which the link will be in your notes on this podcast, for individuals to go through and dial in, through a process of deduction based on the vision that they're holding, what is most important to them. So when I think about, that end goal for myself of having, my name be synonymous with ADHD support in my state, that I would, choose, 2 to 5 values that I stay always checking in with, that are important to me, that make the tasks that I'm taking on every day to move the needle forward, that I'm ultimately going to be fueled by those because I relate it back to that value. So if I was to, choose well-being, ultimately a goal is to provide support for individuals to understand and accept, themselves and their ADHD brains and help them build skills. And so, in that frame of well-being, every task that I take, a social media post, um, which you don't want to do. It's Monday, it's the day I'm going to do my post. I'm kind of dragging on it. If I can go back and realize that one person might read that post and it will contribute to their well-being by providing a resource, um, that will help them help themselves, then that fuels a fire to do the thing. And when we say do the thing, it's like as ADHDers, it's not a disorder of not knowing what to do. We very well know what is important, what needs to get done. But when we harness those values, we're able to kind of gain these guardrails in essential focus to move us forward, as opposed to putting our energy in lots of different places that ultimately are the shoulds of life. I should do this, I should do that. But that, again, if I check in, is this really going to land with somebody ultimately to create a sense of well-being? And if it doesn't, then that's probably something that doesn't need to be on my list.
And when you're talking about this, and I'm thinking, the list of values, depending on what survey you take to figure out what your values are, can be very different. But ultimately, what a value does is it provides like a base belief system in our bodies, right? That we aren't even always aware of. And so, like, when you bring up the survey, I think that's the first step because a lot of people don't know what their values are. And that sounds crazy, but it's true. And so, going in and taking a survey and finding out what your values are and um, learning, what things are more important to you than other things, you can start seeing so many different aspects of our lives that are affected by it. So, like, one of my highest values is fairness and equality. And so that has demonstrated itself throughout my entire life. I've always had this value of fairness and equality. So that has driven me in what I do throughout my life, right? And I'm going to be more motivated to do something that's going to create a situation where there's fairness and equality than I am for something that's going to make somebody feel left out or makes somebody feel, less cared for or, something that's just simply not fair. And it drove a lot of the decisions I made as an administrator and as a teacher, trying to keep things fair and equal. And fair and equal don't always look the same because what's fair and equal for one person might not be, the same as what's fair and equal for other people. So I think about that driver. And then I think about some of the things that I had to do in my life that went against that value.
Mm,
And where those things were, you felt discord. You feel a discord in your body about this is not something that I value. And you don't even have to know that it's a value, right? You just know that there's some discord here and I don't like how this is panning out. So can you talk a little bit about how it can sap your motivation as well when your values don't line up with what you're doing?
yeah, yeah. Therein lies the workplace challenge for a lot of neurodivergent employees is that if they are not connected and if they don't align, if there is not this cohesive driving force for the work that you're doing, that often can end up being where a lot of the struggles lie. Or if you drift away from that, you start there and then you drift away from it over time. But it's just having the self-awareness to recognize when you need support to be able to continue to do the things, or it's time to reassess and pivot. Um, but also, I like that's a great point bringing up when you feel this like visceral reaction to a situation where, like you said, if you see an injustice occurring and that it is just something that you cannot tolerate, you physically have a reaction and you cannot tolerate it. And so, yep, that is like your core beliefs, because our core beliefs are something that, we align with intrinsically in our language, in our behaviors, and ultimately in what feels the easiest to participate in.
Absolutely. And in that, in that example of seeing an injustice where Some people may have the value, a very high, strong value of justice, where other people might not. And like you said, there is no right or wrong. It's just a matter of what your values are. One person may be motivated to do something about it because of their
Right.
value, where the other person may have no need to become involved because it's not a value, a high standing value for them. That works in like all of our life, right? I mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but when you think about it, when you have a value, it will motivate you to do certain things. Where if you don't have that value, you can't count on it necessarily doing much for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as like tasks and our task lists are the things that we need to check in with. Is this getting me to that future vision? Is this getting me to that destination? And so, as it relates to the work that I do, if I think about reputation and how referrals are important and the relationship I have with other providers and clients, it's important to me that my reputation and the service I provide can speak for itself through those individuals. And so I can have my reputation be a core value, and that would actually make me do some of the administrative tasks that are the mundane, not so fun, because I want to respond in a timely manner so that that ease of whatever is happening in our partnership and that follow through is occurring to support that core value of a reputation
And connection.
and connection and well-being, because we hold the to-dos really heavy on our shoulders, and it's really nice to look at them and be like, oh, that actually is not important. I thought it was important for a long time, but to let that go is okay. Or to outsource, to recognize this isn't, I don't have a value that can motivate me, my strengths. This is not my zone of genius, but I can outsource that. I can still be successful in following through by pulling in support. So where else do I need? Can I identify, self-assess, and give myself grace and compassion that I can be anything. I just don't have to be everything.
I love that.
I love it. Yes, all the hats. We often try to wear all of the hats.
Yeah, and in order to wear all the hats, that would mean that we would have to have all the core values, which
Or all
would
the
be hard,
knowledge, all the technical expertise,
all of it. You can't wear
and
every hat.
right. And I think that ADHDers as a commonality have a love of learning, interest-based learning. And so that can sometimes be a detriment when you think that you should be able to be a bookkeeper, at the highest level of all of those details and, you know, information. But is that true? Likely no, because it's not where my zone of genius lies.
Right. So let's take like a everyday example here of
Mhm.
well, let's look at you're in a job. There's a lot of things about the job that you don't particularly care for, but there are a lot of things that do kind of strike your little genius areas.
Mhm.
How can you use your values that bring you that genius? How do you use those to motivate you to do some of those things that you really don't care for?
Well, again, it would be checking back in on something, and it's always checking in with yourself, right? I'm avoiding this task, and there's a reason. So whether it's something I don't feel comfortable, capable of, it's boring. I need, that the boring, mundane, routine tasks, often individuals don't put into a rhythm of their work week. So it becomes something they have to motivate themselves to do, as opposed to allow it become a part of a weekly rhythm, a weekly system that they devise at a time of their day, at a time of their week that works for them, at a time of the quarter. whatever that schedule is. And when it goes into that routine, it reduces the mental load of them having to initiate. So task initiation is having to like convince yourself to do the thing. If every Monday I start my computer and I read my emails and I do these two things on autopilot, eventually they're on autopilot. I don't even have to convince myself to do it.
Mhm.
It's just a part of what I do. If you think about, relating that to things that you do at home around hygiene, we know the order of operations in the shower, let's say. We don't really even have to think about it. It's probably more challenging to get in the shower than to do the things while you're in there because it's just become a system that you've implemented. So I would say that often, some of those tasks are just that. We have to support ourselves in different ways. Um, but we can also dial it back to the mission of the organization. Like if it's something, you're working for this organization because that was what you studied, that's what you're interested in, you agree with the mission, the service, whatever is being provided. Often you can really dive in to what is important about participating in that to you. Let's say environmental stewardship, if you were working for an organization like that, and you have to do the final touches on a report that you've been working on, which often, perfectionism comes in. There's so many layers. Where it's, it might just not be ready, it might just not be good enough. And you're able to use that core value to say, my future vision is moving forward our communities, our states, whatever policies around conservation and environmental stewardship. This report in its small contribution is giving to that end goal.
Mhm. Well, and I mean, like let's just look at the basics of it. If for me, one of my core values is security, right? So security means keeping my job and having an income. So that might be a motivator. Not always the best motivator because it causes a lot of stress, but it might be a motivator for me to be able to do my job.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like filing your taxes, which is like the worst possible task on any ADHDer's list. Um, but to relate that to security, that I will be safe and I won't go to jail, right? Like to
Absolutely.
catastrophize. But you can pull from that to take, small steps to get started on something that is daunting.
And then what do we do? This is the one that always kind of kills me is when we do hit that discord and we
Mm.
realize that something isn't right, but we can't figure out exactly what it is that's causing the discord. Being able to look at our values and say, if these are my values, and if we know that those are, your top values, looking at your values and being able to say, all right, so I have, let's say, security for one of my very top values. This particular thing is making me feel unsafe. And so the discord is there. But sometimes when we don't even know what our values are to start with, we don't know where the discord comes from. Some people may value adventure, right? They don't care about safety. They value that adventure, and they may have different kinds of discord going on in their heads. But it doesn't, and then you get the two people together, and one person really values adventure and excitement, and the other one values security and safety, but they aren't able to say, I value safety and security, and I value excitement and adventure. And so there's this discord between what one person wants to do and what the other person wants to do. And you have values in there that are causing this discord, leading to a disconnect between yourselves. So
Yeah,
I'm trying to drive home like the importance of every part of your life and your values are intertwined, whether you
yeah,
want them to be or not. Because
yes,
whether you know your values or not, you have values. And, and so
yeah,
those things are in every part of our life. Every decision we make, everything that we do is driven by our core values. And that when you start to think about it, is kind of scary when you realize how few people really know what their values are, what's driving them to do the things that they're doing.
Yeah, and right, defining, labeling, some people are just going through the motions, and like you said, it's just like all on a subconscious level of getting, to the next milestone, right? We tend to like just keep setting that bar higher and higher. But as it relates to two individuals or two colleagues or partners, and you have different values pushing you, it is ultimately so much about, and so much of the work I do with my clients is in becoming okay with self-advocacy, making decisions for yourself as the priority. And that doesn't mean you can't make sacrifices or go outside your comfort zone, for others, but not at your own expense, not to the detriment of your ultimate peace, well-being. And so it's being able to self advocate for your needs, regardless of the situation that you're in.
Mhm.
And I don't think you need to have to label your value to be able to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah. A lot of people feel that expressing what they need is selfish.
What value is being demonstrated through that?
Well, again, it goes back to the multiple layers. Every individual has their experiences from the different spheres of their life, their family of origin, their school systems, certain professions or academic experiences, and all of those have handed things to us subconsciously that we didn't even know that we had. And so it is our opportunity as adults to give ourselves the pause, the moment to invest in ourselves, invest in our future, really give space to what is important to you, and just start to notice where you have taken on things that are important to other people.
Hmm.
And but also, as you talked about, like your body reacting to things, if I'm making a decision because I don't want somebody to get upset, but ultimately I'm taking on too much in that decision and it's going to be a cost to me, I'm going to feel really uncomfortable saying no. That's a new skill, to be in recognition of sitting with somebody else's discomfort that you may have caused, not maliciously, but by putting yourself first. And that for so many of my clients is a brand new awareness
Hmm.
that that's okay.
And I want to go back to the not having to name it. You don't have to use like the technical proper term of a value to recognize that you have a value. Um, you can, it's those things that you're like, I just don't think that's right, or I don't feel like that's right, or I feel like this is the right thing to do. You don't have to be able to name the value that's behind it, but being aware that the value's there is important. So I just wanted to clarify that, I'm not saying you have to make your list, although doing a survey is very helpful. You don't have to know the words and the definitions, but just having an awareness of how much our values drive us or stop us in our tracks is really important.
Absolutely. And ultimately, in this list of words, of values, you get to define what that means to you. Just like in coaching, I can use a word, you can use a word. Our definitions of those are going to be different based on what we mean when we say them. And it's the same about your value. If something stands out to you, you get to define what that actually means.
Absolutely. So, another aspect of this, it's come up a little bit here and there throughout the conversation, but I really want to kind of hit hard on it and maybe put out like a real hard line example of aligning your goals with your values to help ensure more success. Can you talk a little bit, just in a linear way, about how you can check yourself and look at those things? What are the steps, basically?
So because, and just speaking to our audience, the ADHDers, because we, like you addressed earlier, we have uh, an interest-based nervous system. We don't have a rewards-based nervous system like neurotypicals. When somebody feels lost or they feel self-doubt in taking the steps to go in the direction of that vision, there's a lack of clarity on the steps to get there, the to-dos, the tasks to get there, is because they're looking for an external locus of control. They're comparing to what other people are doing to get to their goals. They are seeing what is significant outside of themselves or what somebody else is telling them should be important to them. A parent's voice in their head, perhaps. And so to be able to put those blinders on and just be with yourself in the evaluation and self-assessment to really truly get to know yourself and dial it down to what is important to you is going to give you the opportunity to look at that daily task list. Let's say, like, at work, that big picture task list is just a few to-dos. And when you see that they start to build and you start to see your internal voice shoulding on yourself, well, I should do this because, my neighbor Joe is doing this. Dialing it back in, giving yourself space to say, is that true? Is that important to me to get there?
So looking at that goal and saying, is this really important for meeting my goal? And then
Yes.
being able, if it's not, and if it doesn't align with your values, then that can go by the wayside, right?
Absolutely. And also an out of sight, out of mind. If I do this in a journal, if I go through this exercise in a journal and I write down, I have this clarity of vision where I want to go. And I have done the values exercise and I know what is going to be the core drivers to fuel me doing the things to get there. I'm going to keep that in a visible spot that I can see it every day. So as I'm working on my task list, I can check over, is this really important for my energy and time? And if
Absolutely.
it's not, it's off.
Right.
Because here's the thing is if you take something that is not extremely important off your list and it ultimately is something that you want to do, it will linger, it will come back, it will remind you, and you have another opportunity. Okay, at this point, is this now something that I want to take on? And I feel the same about house work and home to-dos is, of course, we want to redo this and paint that and super organize this and super organize that. But if your at home list is more than three things a day, you're going to feel like you're buried.
Yeah, I actually, my true to you to-do list, I say no more than 8 things, but that includes level one activities. So activities that are low energy, low, um, mind sucking things. So,
Yeah. And again, it's going to like it's titled True to You. It's going to be different for everybody. But for, let's say, a new client who starts talking about their to-do list and you ask how many items are on it, and it's 28 to 50, and it just keeps accumulating. It's like, well, what are the top three things?
well, and also it's looking at the to-do list. And I know this is off the values topic, but when you look at a to-do list, are you looking at clean the living room as one task?
Mm, right,
Because that's not one task.
right.
So on
Yes,
my list, my 8 items are things like vacuum the living room, wipe off the countertops, load the dishwasher. They're all individual things rather than looking clean the kitchen, do the
right.
dishes. Do the dishes involves a lot of stuff, right?
Yes, yes. Which also I would relate, some of those at-home maintenance things to those mundane tasks at work, where if there can be a rhythm, and I love that word, a
Hmm.
rhythm in your life because your future self, my future self wants a clean countertop. My future self wants to wake up to a sink that is ready for dirty dishes to go in, not piled with them. And so if I can create a rhythm that works for me to give my future self, again, that vision, that's a very near term vision. which your values can support long-term and near-term goals.
Absolutely. So you had
Yeah,
said earlier that well-being was one of your drivers, right? In doing what you just said, you're taking care of your well-being.
absolutely. Yes. And it's kind of like I can see the domino effect of when I lapse, which is okay, to give yourself grace. We don't have to be extremely rigid. Is that the domino effect for me is that if I, didn't, let's say, clean the countertop, then I'm not as likely to, make food that would be available for lunch for the week, creating convenience, creating to, satisfy that sense of well-being and cognitive, our basic needs support our cognitive functions. And so those executive functions. And so it can be a slippery slope of kind of like what comes first. Did I become dysregulated first and then I wasn't able to fulfill some of those well-being practices? Or the other way around? Did I start neglecting my well-being and then I became dysregulated?
Hmm. So
But
ultimately,
again,
what it really comes down to is knowing ourselves, right?
yeah, it's knowing ourselves, it's validating our experience and having compassion for all of it.
Absolutely. Well, Jen, we've had a great conversation.
I love this topic, and I'd like to share a book title that has supported me professionally by Greg McKeown, and it is called Essentialism: The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And this supports us in seeing that essential focus. What is important to you, and those tasks that are going to actually move the needle in the direction that you want.
I'll make sure to put those in that book in the details so that people can check it out if they so choose. And I want to give you one final question before we go. And that is when talking about values with, let's say, a 16-year-old,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what might you talk to them about?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these exercises are challenging as adults for us to go through because we're always actually looking, I think, for the right answer. And I think that that's the problem is it's so vague and we can't allow things to just be what we're drawn to. We just want it to be concrete and right. And so working with teenage clients, I believe it's in conversation, just noticing when a topic is brought up, like what's important, what's significant about something being different about this for you. Because as a coach, that helps us to be able to ultimately define it and notice that on their behalf and reflect it back to them. So does it feel like this is important because freedom, autonomy, whatever it is, connection, relationships is really important to you?
And I would just, can I add to that? I think it's really important to understand that everybody's values are different
Yep.
and that is part of the human condition, and you can't really fault other people for their values.
Yeah, absolutely not.
I think that it's really important for people to remember that just because you value something doesn't mean that somebody else does. And just remembering that, not even having to do anything about it, trying to convince them, that my way is the right way or your way is the right way. Just being able to accept the fact that maybe their value system is different than mine and being okay with that.
Absolutely. And that advice can span into a lot of areas where we just are better off and we can have peace in the acceptance of those differences.
Hmm. Yeah. So, Jen, been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on again. As always, I love to chat with you. If you can't tell, values is a really important topic for me. I value values.
I can see for myself and for others that I've worked with how I would say mining them, kind of going below the surface and listening to themselves and trusting their intuition is is such a key tool.
Amen. Well, thanks again, Jen, and I hope to have you on again, which I know I will because you're always game.
Absolutely.
If our butterflies on the wall like what they heard and enjoyed our conversation, what should they do?
They should click the link below to like and subscribe.
Yay! So they can get more of us. And reminding people, we've got several of my podcasts with you and I together. And so if you've enjoyed this, go back and listen to the other ones. We have some really wonderful conversations. And with that, we'll see you next time.